welcome back to Narrative Curiosity for our first episode during Trans Awareness Month. So the next couple of episodes we're really going to focus on trans issues. Particularly today, I wanted to speak about a big one, which is gender dysphoria. This was particularly relevant for me recently, so I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about it. Of course, build understanding about what it is, how we experience it, maybe some strategies about how we cope. And, just sort of clear the air a little bit. So, gender dysphoria is, if we look at the definition, the distress that people feel when some element of their body doesn't match their internal gender identity. First and foremost, people do not need to experience gender dysphoria to be trans. Obviously, a lot of trans people do experience varying degrees of gender dysphoria. It is not a prerequisite, and it is not universal. Some things that bother me will not bother other people. So first and foremost, how do we actually experience that? It can be particularly, when you're not aware of yourself and you haven't come out, you haven't really accepted yourself. It might just be something that you feel like you don't like, that is a little bit off-putting about how you look, about your body, that you try and avoid. So for me, the most obvious issue that I had that was very pronounced was that I hated the sight of my leg hair. So that means that I pretty much never wore shorts. Days on sort of 31, 32 degree days where I'd be sweating away in jeans because I just hated the sight of my legs. I didn't really recognize that at the time. I just put it down to being more comfortable in pants. They suited me better. I always liked wearing jeans. Whatever. That everyone sort of accepted that. But bottom line is I hated my leg hair. And we can really see the difference now that I shaved my legs. It was one of the first things I did, how much better I felt, and the fact that I love wearing skirts, love wearing dresses, and particularly as the weather's getting warmer here in Australia, love wearing shorts. I wouldn't necessarily say my legs are amazing, but I just like wearing shorts, so now I wear them, and I want to wear them. So very different sort of reaction rather than that distress that I had beforehand. But perhaps one of the most common elements of experience amongst transgender individuals is that we have this growing awareness of our dysphoria and growing intensity once we come out and accept things. So things that potentially didn't necessarily bother us start to be really significant. So particularly, I accepted my truth 2 to 3 months before I actually came out. And especially when I was still presenting male, I had a beard, a fairly manicured, not overly grown beard, but still facial hair. And that was a big part of how I presented as male. And I had probably only shaved my beard off once in the space of 12 years. And that was in part because my electronic razor broke halfway through a trim and I was looking very uneven, so I needed to shave it off to even it up. But particularly once I accepted my truth, that facial hair became a real problem because I realized that why I had it was to make myself look and feel more masculine because I didn't feel that way inherently. It was a way of trying to fake it. So having accepted myself, it was like, oh my God, this is a sign of, who I've been pretending to be. I really don't like it. I look older with it. It's not me. was very distressing. And there were particular times as I got closer to coming out that looking at myself on video, in a photo, in the mirror was really challenging. Like I wanted to take my razor and just shave it off straight away, hack at my face, whatever, because it was just really intense. But that hadn't been pronounced beforehand. So like, it wouldn't necessarily have been a trigger for me to realize that I was trans, but definitely afterwards, like, oh my God, this is having such an impact now that I actually understand who I am. Like, it just, wow, it was intense. But even beyond that, now starting my transition, having been on hormones for almost a year, there are still elements and days where dysphoria really get to me. Like I can definitely see my progress in my face, how I look, how I present, how I feel, and, in a very positive frame of mind, generally. But then there are times where I just look in the mirror, whether it's the angle, whether it's, how my makeup looks, something. And like I can't always point a finger at it. I don't necessarily go, oh yeah, it's my cheekbones, or oh yes, that chin, or oh, I got some shadow showing. It doesn't necessarily seem to compute why, but just looking at the mirror on those days, that occasion, that particular angle, it's like a real kick in the guts. It's like, oh my God, like all I see is what I don't want to see. And it gets me so depressed and hating myself. It's quite a strong response. It's even talking about it can obviously get me a bit riled up, and I can be a very excitable individual, I know. But we don't want to be excited in that way. So, the lesson here is that dysphoria changes with our transition. What triggers us, what we might recognize as being how our dysphoria sort of manifests in terms of how we feel, and even how it can impact our day. Whereas nowadays I perhaps have that less intense, less often reaction, but it does tend to put me in probably a more depressed state for a longer period of the day until something has lifted my spirits back up to their normal joyful self. But, that is where dealing with things come in handy. So particularly being able to identify these things, being able to recognize, okay, I'm really low at the moment because my dysphoria was really kicking my ass this morning. And then maybe because I've been really low, one or two other things seem to have gone badly and it's all snowballing. That's a time where, we can try and think about doing something reasonably positive. Like today I was feeling a bit low, but not necessarily connected to dysphoria, just other stuff going on, obviously, in the world. And I decided to get my eyebrows down. And that made me feel instantaneously better because I looked at myself going, oh yes, my eyebrows are done. They're more feminine. I feel much more positive. So finding those opportunities to do something maybe comes down to, some upkeep with our presentation, or even just finding an activity that gives us joy, going out with friends, enjoying one of our hobbies, engaging with some self-care, can really help us lift it back up out of that sort of depressive state. The last thing I wanted to talk about is really bottom dysphoria. It's obviously a little bit more sensitive, so let's get to the adults only cut. If you're under a certain age, please start watching this video right now. Well, realistically, I'm not going to get too much into it, but bottom line, obviously, bottom dysphoria, we're talking about, the certain region, appendage, that doesn't necessarily make us feel terribly good. Now, particularly before coming out, I would never have said that I had bottom dysphoria. Been really self-conscious about the way my body reacted to things, the way things were occurring naturally when I woke up. Didn't make me feel very good, made me feel really self-conscious, self-aware, lacking confidence. Now, that's an example of dysphoria. I'm not, saying that when I was presenting male, I wanted to cut anything off, but I definitely didn't feel good about things. Now, particularly like with the beard, deciding to come out probably intensified those feelings, and especially for me, one way of dealing with that is tucking. So since coming out, I have tucked fairly regularly. I will say this to the community: you don't have to tuck. You don't need to present a certain way to pass to be valid. However, if you are experiencing bottom dysphoria and you really get triggered by certain feelings under your clothes or potentially the aesthetic look, then tucking is a way of really dealing with that. And that was the way that I have dealt with it for a long period of time. But secondary to that is that, that dysphoria does have a tendency to intensify. Just quite recently, a little bit of a change in my situation. I had to start showering literally across from a mirror so that every time I was in the shower, I saw myself in the mirror. That for me was really triggering. It meant that I was starting off the day in this really negative, yucky mindset. So I had to make changes to my situation to try and improve that. There are some things that we can't avoid. Obviously, when we talk about bottom dysphoria, the only potential real way, if it is strong enough, to address bottom dysphoria is through surgery, which isn't an option for everyone. It's expensive, painful, potential complications, just not accessible. So there are definitely different factors that prevent us from accessing that sort of treatment. If we don't necessarily have strong bottom dysphoria, we might not feel like it is necessary to go down that route. And that doesn't make you, again, any less trans. So, obviously, we've got a little bit personal today. And, I've just got to deal with being self-conscious, particularly about certain things. But, it is important to recognize the different triggers we have for our dysphoria, how that dysphoria manifests itself, how it can impact our day, and maybe some ways of trying to lift ourselves out. The best way is obviously to find the nearest hit of euphoria you can, but that's not always easy. But also recognize that it's okay if you don't experience certain dysphorias, and that might change at different points in your journey. You might have different trigger points. In likelihood, it will change. So be prepared for that, particularly if you're really just early days, coming to grips, or learning about yourself. Things that perhaps didn't bother you may, but for anyone in their journey, good luck. Keep practicing self-care, keep looking after yourselves, and tune in next time for our follow-up episode on euphoria. So we'll talk about the good stuff. Until then, I'm Jeannie B. Remember to like and subscribe.